Okay. Hopefully everyone can see me and can hear me. I'm try and clear this screen here. Okay. Um, Aloha, half a day, and good afternoon for everyone attending from either Hawaii, Guam, or the mainland. I think most people know me by now. I'm Al Ogata. I'm the president and CEO of Cyber Hawaii. Um, so, and I want to welcome you to sorry, to our webinar today. Um, For those of you who don't know, Cyber Hawaii is a nonprofit information sharing and workforce development organization that focuses on improving cyber resiliency in Hawaii's small and mid-sized businesses, as well as within the community as a whole. We are supported through membership dues provided by the organizations shown here. These organizations recognize the value of improving the cyber resilience of all organizations within the state and are helping to build strong cybersecurity architectures outside of the boundaries of their own networks. We are also supported by the strategic partners at the state of Hawaii and by federal agencies. So I got a chat here. Okay. Um, by federal agencies such as Homeland Security, CISA, the FBI, Coast Guard, and Secret Service. Bear with me, I'm having a little technical issue here. Okay, I think I got that solved. So, this happens. Okay, so it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on identity and access management, a zero trust journey. Today's webinar is extra special for me because I'm coming to you from the RSA Security Conference in San Francisco. Over 40,000 people were projected to attend the conference this week, and based on the crowds I've seen so far, I'd say that that number hits the mark. There have been a number of talks on zero trust. So today's webinar, I think, will be very informative to you and also timely. Um, the goal of zero trust, for those who don't know, is to prevent unauthorized access to data and services, coupled with making the access control enforcement as granular as possible. ZT represents a shift from a location-centric model to an identity, context, and data-centric approach with fine-grained security controls between users, systems, applications, data, and assets that change over time. For these reasons, adopting a ZTA is a non-trivial effort. Today's webinar will explain what zero trust means, what its challenges are, and how your organization can benefit from adopting this model. Questions should be entered into the chat window and will be read at pauses in the presentation or at the end. This presentation is also being recorded, as I mentioned, and the recording will be available on the Cyber Hawaii website in a few days. In addition, the presenter has agreed that you can contact him after today's presentation should you have any questions or need assistance. His email address will appear during the presentation. During this presentation, you're requested to remain on mute unless asking questions during designated Q&A sections. Your presenter today is Giovanni Williams. So Giovanni Williams is a cybersecurity and infrastructure security and security agency, better known as CISA. He is a cybersecurity advisor for the state of Hawaii and the U.S. territory of American Samoa. Um, Giovanni is a seasoned cybersecurity subject matter expert with over 2 decades of experience spanning military, private sector, and federal government roles. He currently serves as a cybersecurity advisor for CISA, as I mentioned, where he provides strategic leadership in fortifying the national critical infrastructure against evolving cyber threats. He's a certified information systems security professional and a recognized subject matter expert in cybersecurity strategy, risk management, and information security governance. His extensive experience in cyber threat intelligence, incident response, and regulatory compliance makes him a trusted advisor in the field. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Giovanni.
Hey,
And
thanks so much, Al.
yeah, let me stop sharing here.
All right.
Okay. Yeah,
All
it's all
right.
yours, Gio.
All right. Let me get it up really quick. Do entire screen. This one, share. And let me get the presentation up. Oh, that's not good. There we go. Can you see it,
There
Al?
you go.
All right. My apologies for that. I was trying to be prepared, more prepared than I was last time, but here we go. And Al, I can't see the chat while I have this in display mode. So if
Okay.
you can help me out, just let me
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I'll let you know when questions come in.
All right, appreciate it. So, hello, everybody. I'm Giovanni. Definitely a pleasure to be with you all. For you all who were here during our last session on the human element of cybersecurity, welcome back. We're here for round two. So, today we are going to be discussing. One second. So, for those who aren't familiar with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the slides that will be provided to you via a PDF. Please take a gander and understand us. But we're the National Cyber Defense Agency for the United States, and we're here to protect critical infrastructure. So, as the main topic of today's discussion is we will be focusing on identity and access management, also known as IAM, and I will be taking you on a zero trust journey. And these two concepts kind of coincide with together, but as we go through the presentation, you'll get a better understanding of the correlation.
Say, Gio, there's
Yes,
a
sir.
little Zoom box showing on the screen in front of your slides. You
All
want to
right,
hide that?
there we
There we
go.
go.
Got it.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you.
All right, so today's agenda, we will be focusing on an introduction to identity and access management, also known as IAM. We will be covering the core concepts of IAM. We will be going over some key technologies. We will also be covering basic practices. I will cover some of the common threats and challenges that you may face in your environment. Then we'll go over some of the trends and some of the future concepts that we're looking forward to in the future. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with question and answers. And I've actually prepared some homework for those of you who will be participating in section two or the session two. I've got some homework for you to go back to so we can have some good discussion points during our next meeting. So, first and foremost, identity and access management. What is it? And I provided you with a definition, and I'll go ahead and read it to you for those who aren't familiar. Identity and access management is a framework of policies, processes, and technologies that ensure the right individuals have the appropriate access to technology resources. And what does that mean and why it matters? I'm going to go over what it means in as much detail as I can, given the time frame, but why it matters. So one, you want to make sure that you are controlling the identity and access to your systems because you would like to protect your sensitive data. Protection of that data is paramount. You want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, due care to protect it. Some of you might be under some compliance standards that you have to follow. And I've put some examples here. There's HIPAA, there's FISMA, there's CMMC. Some of you might be going for your ISO 27001, Klinger Cohen, Sarbanes-Oxley's. There's quite a few. So you want to make sure that you're complying to those things so that you don't face any types of penalties. The next thing is you want to make sure that you're reducing the risk of your security breaches. And I'm not saying that by doing this, this is going to prevent security breaches. No, I'm saying this should help in reducing the risk of you having a security breach. And in case you do have one, it will be a lot more easier for you to identify what the cause was. And as I talked about earlier, there's a correlation between identity and access management and the zero trust model. And what the zero trust model basically stipulates is that users and devices should not be trusted by default. So when you're integrating new technologies, whether they be hardware or software, into your current environment, you want to make sure that by default they are not trusted, and that you set up parameters on how things and who can access those devices. All right, here are the core concepts of identity and access management. And the first one being identification. And what does identification means? Basically, how users assert who they are via like usernames, ID badges. It's how the users are identified, but also how the systems, or whether that be hardware, software, how those systems recognize those users and how those users access those systems. So that's the first thing, is identification, identifying the users and who they are. The second concept is authentication. And authentication is described as how the users verify their identity. There's several different methodologies that could be used for users to identify themselves. Basically, in the examples that I've provided are passwords, biometrics, just different multi-factors of authentication, but also how the system proves the user is who they claim to be. So the combination between identification and authentication are very important when it comes to basically setting up your identity and access management. The third concept being authorization, how users are granted access to those resources based on their identity and permissions. Also, how those systems authorizes what users are allowed to do once they are granted those accesses. So, an authorization, it's it's an organizational kind of approach to this, because you want to make sure that the users are granted access to the resources that they need based on identification and authentication. So from an organization standpoint, you want to make sure you're involving the departments and the organizational units when you're making those decisions about how those users are granted those authorizations, and ensuring that those organizational units are maintaining very good control of the systems that they are giving the authorization for those users to access to, and that they understand them. And the last concept being accountability. How are those users being tracked and audited, and how the system itself tracks and audits those users? And there's several different methodologies you can use to do those things, but these core concepts are what build identity and access management, and can help you and your organization build a good governance framework, and also a technical framework when implementing this into your environment. So, here are the main principles that go along with those core concepts that we just discussed. The first principle being least privileges. So basically, if a person doesn't need access, don't give it to them. Ensuring that people who need access to certain devices and systems is absolutely important, because, and I'll go over this a little bit later, is, they could cause harm. So you want to make sure that you're always using the principle of least privilege when you're granting those access, and having some good governance in place for your organization can help. The second principle is separation of duties. So basically, when you, depending on the size of your organization, and even in small organizations where you don't have maybe a lot of resources, or when I say resources, I'm talking about personnel. If you don't have a lot of personnel, you still want to make sure that there is a strict separation of duties as far as who can give access, and who has access, and who has the authority to do certain things, especially when you're talking about say for instance, if your business is doing contracts, and they're needing to pay like things like invoices and stuff. You just want to make sure that there's a two-person concept or a multiple person concept, that one person doesn't have the authority just to do everything, and you want to make sure that that person's duties are aligned with the authorization to approve whatever it is that they're approving. And the last principle is ensuring that if you're using least privilege, that means that the person who only needs access has it, that that person is aligned to a specific role, within that job category, and also that that person has a need to know, because in certain jobs, there's, within the separation of duties, there's people who need to know things, and there's people who, I mean, they may work in the same section, but their job is completely different, and it's not going to even affect them. So the person who pays your payroll, if they're in the same section as a person who's just monitoring contracts, maybe both of them don't have the same need to know. So you want to make sure that you're evaluating and establishing that correctly. All right, so let's move on to some key technologies that can help you along with the the core concepts and the principles in basically monitoring and controlling your environment. So the first technology, most of you are probably familiar with this. It's something that a lot of organizations use, especially when it comes to email and things within the Microsoft environment. A lot of folks are very familiar with Active Directory. So you got Active Directory users and computers. It's how users are stored as far as their credentials and what groups they're associated with. In within Active Directory, you can assign privileges. You can do separation of duties because you can do groups and OUs. So you want to make sure that within your organization, and I'm not saying that you have to use Active Directory. You want to use whatever capability that makes sense for your organization. Another example is a lightweight directory access protocol, also known as LDAP server. It's a smaller version of Active Directory, and there's several other sources. I just wanted to give you just kind of a direction to go when you're researching these directory services, so that you can get just a plethora of the other resources that are available. The next key technology, and one that's becoming a little bit more prevalent as environments are starting to become more complex, especially with the concept of zero trust, least privilege, separation of duties, and need to know. Um, the systems are being boundaried and segregated in environments, and there's a lot of technologies, there's a lot of systems. So the concept of single sign-on, what it allows you to do is it allows you to have just a single username and password, but you have the ability to access multiple systems and multiple things. Now, it sounds like it's just you have one account and you can just access all this stuff, but even even using the technology of single sign-on, you're still maintaining least privileges, you're still maintaining separation of duties, and you're still maintaining a need to know. You're giving people a single sign-on, which allows them to access multiple systems, but each one of those systems, on those systems, those users are only going to have the privileges that are the least privileges that are required for them to perform their duties. So just remember that. And if you're utilizing single sign-on as a platform or as a service, you want to make sure that you're understanding that concept when you're doing your third-party negotiations, as far as because some third parties are like, oh yeah, we'll do it, and they'll set it up, and they're not doing that because you didn't give them a framework to use as far as how they should separate those duties out and the roles and et cetera. So you want to make sure you're monitoring that. The next thing, you probably heard this a million times. It is one of the key technologies right now that everyone's pushing for. It is multi-factor authentication, and that's basically for users to have more than one form to authenticate or to verify themselves when they're accessing systems. And the reason why this has become more prevalent is just due to a lot of usernames and passwords being hacked, and it allows an extra layer of protection when dealing with the risk of just an adversary. So what is multi-factor authentication? It is something so that could be a username, um, a password. It's something you have. So you got RSA keys, you got tokens. There's so many different technologies now to help implement the multi-factor. Some people use like their business phones as an authenticator. So there's quite a few. And as a third factor, it could be something you are And for those of you who are familiar with biometrics, that could be like a retina scan, it could be a facial scan as iPhone uses, it could be a fingerprint. So those are unique identifiers that could help with the multi-factor authentication. So the next technology is privileged access management. And what this is, it's also referred to as PAM. And PAM's mean most of the time because PAM is how you control and you monitor your administrative level accounts. So it is a way of you tracking the accesses and how the administrative accounts are being used. So you want to, especially in large scale enterprises, it is a very good tool because you'll have multiple, you could have 20, 30 administrators. They all have different levels of access, and you just want to monitor and control it. The next technology is more of a non-technical technology. It's the identity governance and administration, or also known as IGA. And that's basically your non-technical controls of how you're managing the identity lifecycle. So this is like how you are onboarding people. So when you bring a new employee into your environment, do you have a process for establishing their account? And it's good to have a process for that so that you can make sure that you're following uh, the principles of least privilege, separation of duties. That way, when your new employee comes in, I've seen this before in the past. Like some companies, just like the people will just copy their account and give it to the new person, but that new person might not need access to the same things that person had. So, um, making sure that that new person's account is provisioned in a way where they get those least privileges, that they only have access to what they need, and that they have that need to know is really good. The second thing, and I've seen this one, and in the second or the next two things, I don't see many entities that have very good processes for this, but it is highly important, especially if you get yourself in an incident type of situation. The offboarding process and the deprovisioning process. And when I say offboarding process, the offboarding process is when an employee leaves your company, whether that be for positive or negative, it doesn't matter. You want to make sure that you have a process for offboarding that employee. That's making sure that their accounts are disabled, that they're disposition so that account no longer has accesses to whatever they had access to anymore. Um, or in the deprovisioning process, say for instance, you are doing some type of change management within your environment where you are going to be replacing, updating a system. You want to make sure that the previous system is decommissioned properly, where the server is removed. Those service accounts that were associated with that, they could be updated or removed. They no longer have accesses or the authority to do what they did before, prior to you implementing the new device. So even though it's a non-technical control, it is a highly important thing, especially when establishing your cybersecurity uh, governance and your framework. So just food for thought. And the last key technology is something that's near and dear to everyone right now. A lot of industry has utilized or started to utilize this more robustly. Cloud services. There's Amazon, there's Microsoft, there's Google, there's so many. But cloud identity and access management. And earlier I was talking about if you establish some type of a cloud service, whether it be on-prem, hybrid, as a service, you want to make sure that within your third party negotiations and within your contract that it is very established the parameters for that service. A lot of these services are kind of like here's a service in a box, and most of our customers, this is what they do. That might not work for you, so you want to make sure it is highly tailored to your environment from a risk perspective. That way, if something were to happen, it's a lot easier for you to know and understand that when I enter this agreement with this cloud provider, this is exactly what I entered the agreement with. So if there's an incident, there shouldn't be any questions about whose responsibility is what. It should be a cut and dry. I know that their responsibility. It's in the contract, line 27. They should be doing it. And if they're not, then you can have that discussion. All right. So here are some of the common threats and challenges that you can face, especially when dealing with identity access management. So, credential theft, and we talked about multi-factor authentication. A lot of this can be not completely prevented, but it could be deterred by having some of those technologies in place. So, phishing, key logging, credential stuffing, those types of things could be deterred by implementing multi-factor authentication, utilizing least privilege, separation of duties, and things of that such. You're always going to have your outliers, but it's definitely a risk reducer. Insider threat. We talked about some of the monitoring services, like the Active Directory. Understanding what their users are doing, because they could be the ones who are abusing or could harm your system. So you definitely want to be monitoring and tracking how your system is being utilized, especially from a business capacity. Orphaned accounts. We talked about having a good process for decommissioning accounts, also decommissioning old services. These orphaned accounts are accounts no one knows about anymore or associated with the user because that user left and there was no, provisioning or decommissioning or out processing process to make sure that that account got deleted or depositioned. So now that account has been hanging around. You might be in an incident and someone is using that account for malicious activity. So just be aware. Overprivileged users. So when we talked earlier about PAM, as far as how you can utilize PAM to monitor and control the accesses of your administrative accounts, you just you want to make sure that your users only have the privileges that they need to do what they do, and that's for administrators too. Sometimes administrators, they get to doing stuff and they're trying to do stuff just to get stuff done, but then at the end they don't reduce their privileges. They just end up keeping it, and over time that account just becomes just too powerful, and it could be a risk. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring and controlling your users so that they don't become overprivileged. Poor password hygiene. This is why multi-factor authentication is good. Is because of the fact that if you are depending on your policy, you could be asking people to create passwords on a reoccurring basis. And I'll be honest, from my experience, every 30 days trying to remember a password, it gets tedious. So you sometimes you build systems. I don't know. There's all different ways of doing it, but it could lead to poor password hygiene. But if that is the case, then you have some other factor of authenticating that is not just a password in case that password becomes too weak or that password becomes unknown. That is another good reason for multi-factor authentication. And the last one, shadow IT. That's the use of unauthorized devices and apps on your environment. Earlier, when we talked about having a good governance process for decommissioning and onboarding, and that could be onboarding of systems and applications as well. It's very good to understand what's in your environment. Otherwise, you run the risk of users utilizing applications that they shouldn't be using on their environment that could expose the business to risk, or old systems that have been repurposed to do other things that probably they shouldn't be doing. I have a lot of scenarios that I could tell you about, but shadow IT is a thing, and it's something that you want to be aware of. All right, so where do we go to the future of identity and access management? So the first thing is passwords become less of an authenticator need. With the use of multi-factor authentications and some of the newer password, or excuse me, not password, authenticating items, we are trying to get ourselves away from just having passwords as the authentication metric. So biometrics, having trusted devices, that is a token or a authenticator that is utilizing encryption instead of passwords. The next thing is a decentralized identity, and that goes more into blockchain solutions. For those of you who are familiar with like crypto, it basically puts the user in control of their credentials, and depending on your environment, will dictate if you use it. But I wanted to bring it to your attention just because. Depending on your environment, the size and complexity, it might be a good option, for maybe a smaller environment rather than a large scale enterprise. Uh, the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence and machine learning. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are learning about it. A lot of people are starting to implement it into their environments. But basically, it has the capability to analyze behavior and detect anomalous access. It can do analogous analysis. I mean, it doesn't sleep. So it is an extra tool for you to monitor and control your environment. Um, Being in the fact that it can track trends. I can't say better, but it's able to track trends and document things on another scale than having a human user. The error factor is still there, but as you work with it more and you're able to teach it more, and as it learns the environment, it just keeps getting better. So if you're looking at artificial intelligence or some type of machine learning to implement into your environment, that is what some of the future folks who are doing identity access management are utilizing. And as Al talked about, the zero trust architecture, that is a key concept in the industry right now. Trust nothing, verify everything at every request. So that is not just your users, that is your systems, that is your authentication, that is your communication, your networking at every, I mean, from to and fro of that packet, you should understand how that information is shared throughout your environment. And it's good to know, if as much as you can outside of your environment, the transit and where it's going. Because if you're familiar with things like man in the middle and just information capture, you want to make sure your information is as safe as possible. And the last thing is cross enterprise identity federation. Basically, it's a single authentication across multiple enterprises. It's something that we have been doing in the federal government for quite some time. There is multiple federal agencies. It's a large federal government, but I can take my it's called a common access card. I can take my common access card and do things on a different system for a different agency, and the way it authenticates me through a federated trust, it gives me only the accesses that I need to work in that environment. So it's a really neat system. All right. So some of the key takeaways from what I just discussed. First, identity access management is absolutely fundamental to cybersecurity. When you're talking about systems talking to each other and when and why, and when we talked about least privilege and separation of duties and need to know, um, it is a core concept when we're connecting systems, switches to routers to switches. When we're connecting people, we're connecting different software and applications to different pieces of hardware. It's very important that we know why, when, and how it communicates throughout the environment. Automation and continuous improvements are necessary for scalability and resilience. So if you can automate, we talked about artificial intelligence. That is a form of automation. It will help you understand and document a lot of your process. It'll also cut down on your resource uses. But continuous improvement. So if you've never heard of it, the Deming cycle, it is a type of continuous improvement. It's called plan, do, check, and act. So basically, it's a circle. So you make a plan, you do the plan, you check the plan, and then you act upon the plan. And then after you act upon the plan, you're basically doing like an after actions, and you're replanning, and you're just in a continuous improvement cycle. And it's necessary for you to get better. It's for your environment to get better and mature, and to protect your environment at the same time. And the last takeaway is identity has become the new perimeter in modern network and security models. And now, I mean, you have so many things communicating. I remember when I was when I first got on the internet, and that was like a while before DNS, when you had to know the IP addresses to where you were going. Um, there was a lot less things communicating with each other. But nowadays, everything, we got our phones, my headphones, my car, like the airplane, my Nest, like everything is communicating. So it's very important that you understand, uh, you know, what is communicating with what, why, does it need to, does it have the accesses and privileges that it only needs and no more. And when it comes to separation of duties, I don't want my Nest talking to my home computer. So, because what I do on my home computer could affect that. So it's just important that you understand those separations. All right. For our next session, I got 5 non-technical questions that I want you to look at, and I have 5 technical questions that I want you to look at. And that way, when we come into our next session, we can have a discussion, and possibly I can give you some pointers to help you in your environment to help build your maturity as far as when it comes to identity and access management. So I'll go ahead and read the questions just so you can kind of start formulating some ideas. So we'll start with the non-technical. First, how often are user access rights formally reviewed in your environment? And that could be annually, monthly, whatever it is. The second one is privileged access request and approvals formally reviewed. Are you reviewing your privileged access request? The third one, are there clear policies mandating the use of multi-factor authentication? And I put MFA. Hopefully, if you don't remember, just scroll back up a couple of the slides, and it's actually written out. But MFA being multi-factor authentication. Number 4, are onboarding and offboarding processes standardized and enforced? And then the fifth is, how is identity and access management integrated with compliance audits? And that's within your environment. Those are the non-technical questions. Those are some doozies. If you can answer those or you can't, it's definitely some foundational concepts that I can help you work on. And the technical questions, number 1, are privileged and regular user accounts separated with different levels of monitoring? Are single sign-on and multi-factor authentication implemented across cloud and on-premise systems? Are orphaned accounts regularly detected and deactivated? Is role-based access control or attribute-based access control systematically used? And the last question is, are abnormal users' behaviors detected and alerted on automatically? So with these questions, answer what you can. What you can't, if you still have questions, then write those questions down, and then I'll address them during the next session. So at this time, that concludes the presentation portion. I'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A, and I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Al.
Yeah, thanks, Gio. Very, very interesting. We do have one question that's in the chat from Brent. He asks, what challenges have you faced in integrating legacy systems into a zero trust framework?
So it depends. I've in different environment, I've faced different challenges. So one is, some of the legacy systems did not have the same technology capabilities as the newer systems that we were going to implement. So definitely we had to figure out how we can get the information that was in the legacy system over to the new system because there was no way for those two systems to communicate. So we had to think of some very out of the box capabilities in order to get the data from those systems over to the new systems, because we just couldn't get them to communicate. Other times, I was able to get those systems to communicate, but for the previous system, just due to some history, there were incidents that were involved in that other system, and here we are, we have a brand new system, never been touched. I was very cautious in making my decision as far as how we got the data from the old system to the new system. There was not going to be a connection between those systems because I knew the other system had previously been compromised, and I didn't do the evaluation of the previous system to make sure that it was safe. And I was implementing the new system, so we thought of some creative ways to get that information from those systems or to build those capabilities from those systems into the new system.
Any other questions? We're at the Q&A session, so if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and speak freely at this point. Everyone's quiet today.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it's Corwin from Bomb. Um, I what's from your experience, Geo, when people try to implement all these IAM things, what do people usually have the hardest times with? Do you think maybe like top two things maybe?
The top two things that people have the hardest time with, and just I've at least 20 organizations that I've been to. The first one is least privilege. That is the hardest one, and that's just due to just negligence over time and just like it's just it just gets ugly, like especially if environments have existed for a long time and you got accounts everywhere and stuff, and trying to close stuff, and people are like, well, no, that does this and this and that, but we got to get rid of that because nobody monitors that. Least privilege is probably the biggest thing that you're gonna have a headache with, and that's gonna come from an organizational standpoint, because when you start telling other departments, like, hey, we're trying to do this and we're trying to make our environment safer, but I'm not going to allow your guys to know to do this any longer because one, they shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And two, it's just safer for the environment. So you're going to get a lot of pushback from other departments on that because they're like, well, what about, my department that I'm ahead of, and I need to do all this stuff. Well, you do. And I will make sure that you still have that capability, but we can't have your guys who are not IT professionals, and I'm not saying just IT professionals need these privileges, but some of the privileges that your people have, they don't need or they shouldn't have because they can actually do damage on some of these systems. So that one is probably your biggest one. The second one is I think the provisioning. And when I say provisioning, I'm like establishing the onboarding and offboarding process, and writing the process down is not going to be hard. It's you make a document. Hey, when we get a new employee, this is what we're going to do. The enforcement of that is going to be the hardest because there's going to be expectations for people to do things, and they might do it for the first couple of months, but then after that, it's going to start to slip off. And unless you have someone actively monitoring it and there's some type of auditing for it, eventually they're going to stop doing it or they're just going to forget about it. So those two things are probably your biggest challenge.
I'm in a meeting right now. Just for my CPE class.
Thanks, Gio.
Cybersecurity one. You're on. You're not on.
Yeah.
Hey,
Rose,
I have
did you
a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when implementing these strict security access controls, like enforcing them, how do you balance out the user experience? I know that we don't want to put too much friction between the user, but we also want to keep them safe. So how do you What's your approach on that?
So that's a good question, and that it is also a trick question. To balance out the user experience, you have to understand your environment. If you don't know your environment, it's going to be very difficult for you to balance out the user experience. And when I say that is because when you're implementing the least privilege and the separation of duties, you got to know why you're doing what you're doing to what systems. So if you don't understand those systems well enough, and a lot of times when people are trying to implement this, they don't really have a good baseline and understanding of their environment. And when I say baseline, your understanding your hardware, your software for your technology is highly important. And I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna go into that a very good detail in one of our next sessions. But if you don't know those things, it's going to be very difficult for you to balance this because you're going to be telling someone, "Hey, your guys, I don't, your guys aren't going to need access to this anymore." But they're going to be like, "Well, that's our system. That's mine." Well, okay, that's yours. You need it. Okay, got it. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to boundary you off. I'm going to isolate you, and you can have your access to this and only that, but you can't have access to any of this other stuff. So it's a balance, and it's hard for me to answer that without understanding what I'm balancing for. I'll be honest, because it's not always the same answer. And I'll give you an example. So I was a CISO at a college, and when I first went to the college, there's multiple colleges within this college. Some of those colleges are international, some of those colleges are not. They are just local. And it was very difficult for me because before I got there, everyone was like kind of doing everything in the same environment and it was all kumbaya. But when I did a risk analysis of the threat, the international colleges were of a higher risk than the colleges from a local perspective. So when I was segregating the environment, I wanted to put the international colleges on one side and I wanted to put the local ones on another side. That way that the higher risk environment does not affect the lower risk environment on a higher level. But I still allowed a way for those two environments to communicate, but I put firewalls between both of them and they could only communicate on certain protocols. So it changed how things were because people couldn't share things in a manner that they were used to, like just dropping files on shares and stuff. They had to utilize a different type of we utilized it was an application that allowed them to encrypt the information and share it across, but then it was scanned at each boundary. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Yeah, it did. Awesome.
All right.
Okay, I see Richie has his hand up. Go ahead, Richie.
Yes, thank you. Gio, how do you ensure a secure SSO implementation across multiple applications? I mean, if one of the credential got compromised, then there's also a risk of getting access to other platforms, right?
Mm-hmm. So
So,
there's no way to ensure it. I mean, you can, when you're implementing these controls, you're implementing the controls as best as you can. And I never trust any of this stuff and say like, oh yeah, that's secure. No, I monitor it. I'm checking. My teams were checking logs all the time, monitoring the accesses, making sure that there were no anomalies within the communication between the different protocols. So there's no way to ensure it. Once you establish those connections,
Mhm.
then you open yourself up to whatever that risk may
Okay.
be.
From your perspective, do you believe that SSO is a good security? I mean, there's a lot of risk implementing SSO, right? From your opinion.
I mean, there's a lot of risk implementing a lot of different protocols. Is SSL the right? Is it the only option that you have? If it's the only option that you have, then I would implement it. But if you have other options, there are other secure socket layers or secure layers of communications that you can establish. I don't know if SSL is the best for you. I don't know if you're trying to have me explain if SSL is safe. I
No,
can't say, yeah.
sorry, I'm trying to I'm asking regarding the SSO if this is if this is a good practice to implement within the organization.
It's one of the best business practices that you can implement. It's not the only one though. There are other ways to have systems communicate via a secure method.
Sorry, Gio, I'll jump in here. Richie's actually my boss. Um, he's saying SSO, single
SS,
sign-on,
yes,
single
yes,
sign-on. Okay, okay, I
Oh,
thought you were
single
talking.
sign-on.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly,
okay,
correct,
exactly.
yes.
He was
okay.
asking if like that's like using it because from my understanding, it's to manage complexity when you need access to all these resources. But at least our understanding that is that it's less safe because once you get that one login, you have everything that guy has. Is that your shared opinion on that?
It could be. It depends on how you implement it in your environment. So for instance, we implemented single sign-on via the college via it was Okta. And I'm not condoning for any uh, vendors here. But I'm just kind of taking you through the scenario. But we utilize Okta. But we were very I guess very critical about the separation of duties and least privilege when we were doing that. So all of the accounts that had single sign-on access were basic user accounts. They None of those accounts had administrative privileges or special privileges. Only regular accounts for students were utilized for single sign-on, and the reason why we did that is from a risk perspective. When we did the analysis, from what you said, if one of our administrators were compromised and they had single sign-on, and they might have been a DBA, they might have been a networking person, because we didn't have a lot of resources, but definitely we didn't want the risk to be that high. So if you're going to implement single sign-on, the separation of duties or the segregation of your Active Directory or how your accounts are established would probably be a good thing to look at.
Very good. Excellent discussion. I see Elaine has his hand up. Elaine?
Hi, Giovanni. I think you've been to our corporation in Saipan, the hospital. This is just a question. We already have a system in place, but because our corporation is growing bigger, and now with all these IAMs, requirements, this is just a question because from our HR new employee, and then finances, and then medical. On the technical side, or on the IT side, yes, we using this, but because of the corporation is going bigger, doctor access, nurses access, all of those are got to be separated. And my question is, I don't know what's the practice, but is there like one person needs to have all this given, he or she will be the one who make decisions, or you really separate them, let's say, all the technical, let's say medical technical practitioner have someone make decision based on their rights or you know history on the corporation, on the finances, because right now IT has a lot of, I guess, not control, but uh, I should say we're the one who usually give rights. Yeah, but we have a technical, we have the medical, we have the finances, and because for one person, this is a lot. Those are just questions, but we are in place right now.
So here's some advice. So one, um, when you're establishing your user privileges, you want to get as much information as you can from your organization. And when I say you're from your organization, you're gonna need to sit down with those other departments, because a lot of times I see IT folks, and I've done it before when I was an IT person. Because we're managing the technology, sometimes we're a little bit more steadfast in trying to implement it because we want to fix it. We want to get things done so we can, there's so many problems. We want to move on to the next one. But what you're going to need is you're going to need to, one, there needs to be an establishment of leadership. There needs to be like a leadership group of folks who kind of sit down and establish some governance behind the implementation or the onboarding of new employees. And when I say that, when I say leadership too, it's hopefully it's a group of leadership who can say, okay, when employees are getting onboarded, we want them to have access to what only the things that they need to access. And then from there, those leaders can establish, okay, so if it's a doctor, then maybe there's a representative from the doctor group who can sit down with the IT team and say, okay, within our doctor organization, here are the different types of things that we may need access to. In oncology, here's the stuff that they work with. In brain surgery, here's the stuff that they work with, and you kind of start mapping that out. That's how you start building out your OUs in your Active Directory. Once you get those mapped out, then you sit down with the users and the folks who are doing it and be like, okay, so what kind of things are you doing on a day-to-day? What do you need access to? Oh, I only need access to file share and this. Give them access to that. And as they grow, once you establish like a baseline of the accesses, as things grow, that's when you start implementing your change management process, because you want to make sure all this stuff is documented, because as things grow in complexity, they just grow out of control and people don't understand them. So if you're documenting this process as you go, as it gets more complex, it's a lot more easier for you to reference later as to, okay, so why did we give access to this OU? Oh, because we sat down with these folks within their department and we identified for the annual review that, hey, this is what we needed last year, but this year we need this. So you can start establishing those things, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Good advice. Good advice. Thank you.
No problem, sir.
I see Brent has his hand raised. Brent?
Hey, Giovanni. So our remote workforce is growing, and we also have more and more clinicians going out. They're mobile. They're using mobile devices. But I guess regarding a strategy for implementing zero trust, across this kind of distributed enterprise with remote workers, do, do you have like, I guess, a strategy for that, or is it a mindset? Because or is it something like, because I know you talked about MFA, SSO. I mean, those are things that we've implemented already. I was just trying to get your I guess get an idea of how you would approach a
Yeah.
growing remote workforce, mobile users, things of that nature. Thank you.
So I'll tell you exactly what I did. So when we had our mobile workforce, so one, and I segregate everything. Uh, so
Yeah.
our remote workforce was on their own VPN. I mean, they had their own established route, and the reason is because everything coming in from that distribution point or that route or that port on that router, I wanted to monitor it because it's external. Like, this is stuff plugged in people's houses. And like, I wanted to make sure that everything that came in through that pipe was monitored highly, because I don't know what that stuff is. The stuff like the university stuff that's here on prem, like I know that stuff. I can touch it. But the things that are coming in from the outside, like we had professors going to other countries and stuff. So I established a separate boundary with its own subnet and VPN
Mhm.
just for that. That way I firewall that off too. That way I could track and monitor just that traffic on its own. That way, if I saw anything anomalous or something strange within that traffic, I can isolate that environment very easily and it wouldn't affect everybody else.
So, and you're probably using a seam.
I did have a scene. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Great discussion. Any other questions at this point? I think we're right at our time. So Excellent job, Gio. I'm going to go and share one last slide. You can find it. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for attending today and for the truly excellent discussion. I think this topic is extremely timely. It's also very complex, and it's actually one of those things that, as we as professionals, we look at it as a trust issue. You know, make sure you don't trust anything. Make sure you validate everything. One. And that's fine. That's the way we talk about it. But as you go back to your organizations, as you take the checklist that Giovanni put out for you to go through the questions, one suggestion is see if when you talk to folks about the implementation within your organization, whether it happens to be role-based access or whether it happens to be people getting access to certain assets or capabilities. Try and talk about it in a positive manner, in the sense that by making sure that each of the people don't have more accesses than they need. In some senses, you're protecting them because under the concept that anyone can make a mistake, anyone can get hacked. By making sure that they don't have things that they don't need and probably don't want, you're reducing the risk that if something happens to them, that they can be, in some senses, blamed for what happens to the company, what happens to the business, and in a sense, get them to understand that to do their job, they need to have certain accesses, and they should have those. If they don't need the accesses, they really don't want to run the risk of exposing the company if something happens to them. So with that, I'll stop. We have a second part, part two that Giovanni mentioned on May 28th. That's where we'll have a discussion for all of you who are in the room and can attend, and have gone back and talked to your organizations about the questions that Gio put up. The meeting will be either in person or remote. Once we're done, I'll send you an email that gives you a request if you're going to attend. I'll also send out the presentation so you have the slides and can talk to your internal folks about it. And we will hope that next discussion is even more in-depth, more practical than the one we had today, which was truly excellent. We'll be sending out, in addition to the slides, a survey request. We'd like your feedback. We always want to make these things better. And I just want to let you know that the next topic we'll be addressing is vulnerability management. The first meeting will be on June 17th at 2 p.m. That will be all virtual. And then the follow-up for that will be July 29th, again, either in person or remote. And we'll send out a reminder on that. So with that, I want to, again, thank everyone for attending. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And good luck as you go back to your organizations to talk about this truly important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Too.
Thank you.
Thank you.